Guys, we might as well get stuck into it. Hopefully you can all hear me. I'm not the most tech savvy person, but we'll give it a red hot crack. So firstly, thank you for tuning in tonight. Obviously a little bit different to what we are usually used to, being in the gym, getting a little bit of a workout in, getting our sweat on. And getting stuck into some food, but it's great that we can still connect with each other even through our computer screens, and hopefully the restrictions are lifted quite soon, so our next events we can all kind of interact with each other again. So tonight we have the support of two awesome guest speakers. I can't talk about these guys highly enough, but before I do, there's a few thank yous that I want to shout out to, and that's our the support that we have got. So Moondog Brewery have jumped on to support us, which is fantastic. So they've given us a little prize pack to give away tonight. We've also got True Protein. Has given us a prize for a workout that I know some of you guys have given it a shot. Valiant Barbers, who fixed this today, they've given us vouchers, been great supporters along the way. Richillo Coffee is another great supporter, and Northside Fitness, which unfortunately we haven't been able to get into the gym much lately, but they've been a great supporter and helped us out with a workout. So for you guys, I know there's a lot of new people to Beyond the Barbell tonight. So first of all, welcome. So Beyond the Barbell, it's a support network for men. So our group aims to create a safe, welcoming and enjoyable space where men can meet like-minded men. They can work out, they can chat, they can learn, they can benefit physically, psychologically, and socially of being part of a supportive community group. So that's what we're about. We do run these events. This is our third one. Again, as I said, it's a little bit different to what we're used to, but we adapt. And we've got so many people on tonight, which is fantastic. And we are going live on Facebook as well. So I guess I'll start off with introducing our two guest speakers tonight. So first we have Chris Anstey. So Chris is former professional basketball, two-time Olympian. He is one of Australia's most recognised and celebrating sporting identities. Standing at an impressive 7 foot tall, and I've met him a couple of times in person, and he is 7 foot tall. His career includes stints in the NBA, in the NBL, both as a player and a coach, and he has played for the Australian Boomers. So post-retirement, Chris has served as a head coach at Caulfield Grammar since 2010, and he provides support to various other sporting and community organisations through training, mentoring, and other leadership initiatives. And that's where I met Chris through a previous role that I had. He used to deliver leadership workshops for my students. We're also lucky tonight to have Carl Nelms with us. So Carl is a registered psychologist and the founder of Blokes Psychology down in Hyatt. He is extremely passionate about assisting men to overcome the stigma of reaching out for support. So Carl has worked in community health settings, providing counselling, mental health outreach support. He's worked with ex-offenders, integrating them back into society. He's worked with various national helplines and has experience and specific interest in supporting individuals experience depression, anxiety, anger, and addiction. So Carl has also just launched a podcast, the Blokes Psychology, which can be found on Spotify, where he interviews a range of guests discussing all things men's health, which is fantastic. I tune into it every week. I can't get enough of it. So first of all, I'd just like to welcome the two guest speakers. Thank you so much for giving up your time on a wet and cold Thursday night. So we will start off with Chris tonight. So this is an open discussion, guys. It's not really a question and answer. I hope not, because I'm terrible at interviewing and asking questions. So please, at any time throughout the session, if you've got a question for either Chris or Carl, jump in. Just unmute your mic, jump in, ask away. These work really, really great if it is an open discussion. So it will be linked around men's health, but if it goes on a track somewhere else, fantastic. These two guys have a wealth of knowledge and experience. So make the most of it while they're here. So as I said, we'll start with Chris. So as you can probably see in the background, I'm a massive basketball fan. So I've been following Chris for years and pretty excited when he made the NBA. So he was picked number 18th. Correct me if I'm wrong, Chris. Picked 18th overall.
Going well so far.
You were about 22 years old. So
that's right,
96, 97.
97, yep.
Yep. So that's a massive move, being 22 from Australia, moving over to play in the NBA. Late 90s, it was massive, thanks to the one and only Michael Jordan. But NBA was massive. How did you kind of go about moving to the US and having that sort of, that pressure of kind of experience?
Yeah, probably, first of all, hi everyone. Thanks for having me. It's probably started a bit before that for me because I was so late to the sport of basketball. For anyone in here who's followed AFL footy at all, I actually grew up playing tennis with Dustin Fletcher. So he went on to play 400 games for the Essendon Footy Club, and we played doubles together from the time we were probably 10 years old all the way through until he was 16 and went off to footy, and I lasted one more year playing tennis, and we were going pretty well, but probably, that change to basketball, it was just a fluke. It came about. My younger brother played. He convinced me to fill in for him one night at Keilor Basketball Stadium, and I tell people that it's an interesting one, and you learn things in hindsight. But on that drive up, it was the last thing I wanted to do. I was doing my Year 12 exams, didn't want to go, and I was grumpy and shitty that I had to be there. And we only had this 5-minute drive, and I think I still do, and I know everyone has those days where you can't be bothered, so you're not really the best version of yourself. And somewhere along the way on that drive up, I thought, you know what, if I'm doing it, I might as well try. And probably it had something to do with me wanting to be better than my brother, one of those sibling rivalry things. But I went up and I played, and it was a men's D grade game for a team called Albatross on a Tuesday night at Keilor. So playing against guys who really couldn't play, and I had 50-something points. And that was it for me. I thought, shit game, shit sport. Drove home and never expected to think about basketball again. And this was just before my 18th birthday. And, a week or so later, my telephone rang, and it was a guy from the Melbourne Tigers junior basketball club sort of saying, we haven't been able to track down any coaches you've played for. I said, what are you talking about? I don't play. But someone saw you play at Keilor, and I sort of had to explain that I was just filling in. And it's funny, the things that I was pretty good at tennis, my footwork was okay. I had reasonable hands. And anyway, he convinced me to come down and try out. And as it turned out, I went and actually tried out for 2 clubs. One of them was the Nunawading Inspectors, and their coach was, and I went there first. And if you've ever been around a sport that you've never been more uncomfortable being in an environment, there's kids who have been there for 10 years. It's a high-level basketball training environment. The coach was like, jump in and start, just join in. What? I literally sat on the side of the court for about 10 minutes, looked at my dad and went, can we go? And same thing again, I was never going to play again. And it took a little bit to get down to the Tigers, and because I didn't really want to change sports, but I knew that some of the tennis players were catching up to me. And so I went down to the Tigers, and it was just exactly the opposite. It was, I got there before training. The coach took the time to introduce me to the team, explained everything, that I was new to the sport, that if anyone could help support and provide advice along the way, that, just be patient. And Yeah, I don't think I started the sport for the sport itself. I started the sport for the people. And I enjoyed being a part of this group that I wanted to turn up on weekends and hang around with for a couple of hours. And, I progressed to get to your question pretty quickly that sort of 4.5 years later, I got drafted to the NBA. So my improvement was really, really rapid, but shit, I worked hard. And I won't bore you with all of that, but, to go to the NBA for me, it was almost a natural progression because I never thought I'd be an NBL player, let alone an NBA player. And it wasn't playing in the NBA that was daunting. It was living in Dallas. I mean, it was just a point on a map on the other side of the world for me as a 22-year-old kid. And I didn't know anyone there. Actually, I knew one person going over. And ironically, I just wrote a story about Luke Longley, who some of you or most of you have probably heard of. And a very similar theme, I suppose, now that I'm telling the story, that a couple of weeks after I landed in Dallas, my phone rang and it was Luke Longley. G'day, Chris, Luke Longley. I just wanted to reach out. I figure you might be settled in now. And we just started talking, and to have another Aussie accent. And if anyone here's actually been watching that Last Dance documentary, you probably get an appreciation of the type of life Luke was living at the time, which was a circus. It was crazy. So it was really special for him to take he didn't have to do it. I mean, just take the time to think about, hey, I might just give Chris a call. I'd never met him before, and ended up speaking to him 6 or 8 times over the course of the year. We caught up with each other when we played each other, and he became that sort of guy that had been through it before. But probably the biggest thing he taught me was, it's really easy to get caught into a fishbowl of your own life or your own importance and sort of forget the bigger picture of what else is going on. And so for Luke to be going through what he was with that Last Dance group of the Chicago Bulls and have this really broad perspective on life. There are plenty more hours in the day to be a human being, not just a basketball player. And I've spent a lot of time in the sport since, but I never really liked being called a basketball player. I was always just someone who happened to play basketball. And I think a lot of people don't understand the difference. But for me, I was always just someone who happened to be good at basketball. I never wanted to be known or pigeonholed as a basketball player because I always felt that I was a little bit more than that. And they could take basketball away from me any time and it wouldn't have bothered me. I would have found something else, or more importantly, probably someone else to go and spend that time with. So probably not the sort of answer you were looking for, but
no, that's, I guess it kind of leads into or then one of the next points. So when you arrived in Dallas today, and I guess mental health probably wasn't huge back then in the late 90s. Did they have wellbeing support for you young guys?
Mental health wasn't recognised as a thing. And even more so, I left a really great environment, the best I'd ever been a part of at the Southeast Melbourne Magic, where, it's funny, before anything was called mental health or before coaches took the time to get to know players, our coach, Brian Gorgon, was like that. You'd have players and families and small groups of players together with their own families over at the house. And he let the whole team into his life, and he involved himself in our lives, not just us as basketball people. So I had this 3-year block leading up to going to the NBA that was what I knew professional sport to be. And the longer I went through it, the more I realized how rare that was. But to get to the NBA, it was the other way around, because you can get traded any minute. You look around the locker room, everyone's making over $1 million a year. There's a sense of entitlement. Every single player has their own little group of people around them telling them that they're the best and they deserve more and they should be paid more. And it was this really selfish environment, and it still is to a large extent in the NBA. There's a lot of egos. I mean, you hand a young 20-year-old kid millions and millions of dollars and ask them to be humble. It's a really difficult thing to do. So it was that environment, and probably even more so why even as I look back now, my friends that I still keep in touch with in Dallas were, the friend and the group, the friends I met through him away from the sport, but more so the support staff. And when I say, the physios, the trainers, the assistant coaches, and I just related better to them. They seemed to be more normal, for lack of a better term, that they cared about more than just themselves. And I was always wired like that a bit more. So, definitely none of that support. And, I guess when it was tough and when you were homesick, it wasn't the teammates or the club you'd turn to. It was the people away from the sport. And that was almost an escape, I suppose.
Yeah. I guess kind of fast forwarding, after you played in the NBA, you went and played in Europe. Correct me if I'm wrong. You had kids at that stage?
Yeah, no, I did. I played in the NBA for 3 years. I came home for a couple, and then I went to Russia.
Can you tell us about the Russia and taking your family over there? And
that was the one. I've sort of said to a few people that I almost feel guilty saying that isolation for me here has been relatively easy, because isolation for me in Russia was a nightmare. It was minus 45 degrees outside most days. It was only light for 6 hours. No one spoke English, and it was just miserable and dreary. And, I got there in October, and by December, I was the worst I'd been. I was miserable. I didn't see myself getting through the next 6 months to the end of the season. I wanted to go home. And the less the less occupied you become. You stay up late, you're looking at the wall, and you're not sleeping well, and all those sorts of things. And it's funny, I remember just getting up one morning, and I think back then my thought was always, someone will make this easier for me, but because I was used to having that support around me, and it became really clear that it had to be me that I depended on first before anyone else. And so I woke up this particular morning, and I remember it clear as day, and I sort of gave myself almost a pretend punch in the face, and told myself to get over it a little bit. And but that's one thing. And I did a couple of things. I shaved my head, and I'd never done that. It was almost like a symbolic fresh start for me almost. And back then there was no social media and no Netflix and none of that. So it was box sets of DVDs. That was what I was dependent on. But the more bored I got, the more I just drilled into, all the series and the sitcoms, and they're just brain numbing. And I got on Amazon that morning, and I started ordering documentaries, and I ordered, some short courses, and I just thought I better start doing something for myself, and not just be basketball and be bored. And that day was really great for me. And I've done a bunch of talks through this period for school kids, and the thing I started doing was actually getting, as the day went on, I'd start writing myself a list of what I had to do the next day, and it sort of helped me get up and attack each day with a sense of purpose when there really wasn't much to do, even though these might not have seemed like really important things to do. There was a reason to get up each day, and I knew I had to get some things done and get moving into my day. And it's amazing what you get used to, because another month or so after that, I was actually quite comfortable where I was. I was intrigued with the place and intrigued in learning about human behavior and all those types of things. And ended up going back, finished that season and then went back for 2 more. So it was a fascinating time, and one where I learned a lot about myself. And, a lot of people will tell you, again, I'm certainly not even close to being an expert, but you really do learn a lot about yourself when you overcome something a bit trickier than just sailing through some things smoothly. And you learn who your mates are, you learn who keeps in contact with you, and you probably get a greater sense of gratitude for some of the smaller things that you might have taken for granted before that. And for me, that's what my time in Russia, probably, forget the basketball side, but that's probably where my growth came from over there.
Yeah, definitely. I guess we'll keep progressing with your career. Then you came back again. Please correct if any of my stats are are wrong, please let me know. You came back and played for the Tigers.
Yeah,
In 2007, you guys lost to the
you missed one.
Dragons.
We won in 2006. We lost in 2000. So we won the championship in 06. We came runners up in 07. We won it again in 08. Came runners up in 09. So pretty successful period of time. We went pretty well.
So in 08, you were your captain. Yep.
Yeah, I was captain the whole 4, and I did read your notes, and yeah, I suppose I still love new challenges, and you know, even to this day, where I've got really good friends who we always ask ourselves, we challenge each other, when's the last time you did something for the first time? Because as adults especially, we tend to get in our routines and not really be that comfortable doing absolutely brand new things, and could be anything small from cooking something different to going somewhere to physically participating in an activity that you haven't participated, whatever it might be. And that was almost how I set my goals with my basketball. But you know, oftentimes you get asked, you know, who your greatest opponent is, and some of the injuries you have. And you know, as a sports person, it's never really the on-field stuff unless it's one of those traumatic injuries. It's generally the off-field stuff that affects you on-court, on-field as much as anything. And you know, but we had a chat, and you know, probably the time I was struggling most in my career was 08, 09, and going through a divorce. The court had told me that I couldn't see my kids. There were some stories made up about me that until I could prove that they were false, I just couldn't see my kids. And there's nothing quite like being called a liar and being accused of doing something to your children that you couldn't possibly ever fathom even contemplating. And then on top of that, because I was captain of an NBL team, I was shit scared that it was going to get public, these accusations, and just couldn't believe that someone would say that. And then people close to my ex-wife would believe it. And so we'd already won 2 championships at this stage. I'd won a couple of MVPs as well. And I was still captain of the club. I just didn't want to be there. I just didn't want to turn up to training. I didn't want to, and I didn't want to tell my teammates because I was captain that I didn't want to be there. You know, I always felt it was okay to be pretty open and transparent, but I thought if they think their captain actually doesn't want to be there, that's really not setting the sort of tone that this group needs to have to continue to be successful. And I was driving home one day. I'm from Melbourne. I think everyone here is from Melbourne. We used to train at Sandringham, so I jumped on the beach road. I was living in Port Melbourne, and it occurred to me, you know, because we all know the right answers, but very rarely do we act on them. I thought, I've got to call someone. But for the life of me, I couldn't think of who. And I was trying to figure out someone that I sort of looked up to and admired from afar that seemed to be what I was looking for was an athlete who always seemed to have shit going on in their life, but always still seemed to be able to perform. And I was fascinated as how an athlete could do that. And I'm a Western Bulldogs fan, and I picked up the phone and literally called the switchboard of the Western Bulldogs and asked for Jason Ackermanis. Or asked if I could leave my phone number for Jason Ackermanis, who's probably one of the most polarising AFL players that there's been. But in my mind, he always seemed to have some shit going on. There was always negative opinions and negative public opinions of him, and yet he still always seemed to play great games of football. And so I rang the club, left my name and my number, and didn't really expect to hear from him. And he called me back before I got home. You know, Chris, it's Acker, do you want to grab a coffee? And I just kept driving. I went to Mooney Ponds and caught up with him in this little cafe that he always went to. And we sat and chatted for 3 hours or so, and it was incredible. Nothing that I'll share here because it's probably not really that relevant. To be honest, I don't remember a lot of the details, but we ended up catching up 6 or 7 times and gave me a very different perspective on, you know, things I could try as a distraction on the court, you know, ways around attacking mindset to leave what was going on off the court and have basketball be an inverted commas sanctuary and things like that. understanding that with a little bit of patience, your kids and people around you come to know you and understand the truth, and those sorts of conversations. And it was such a great resource for me to have for the rest of that season. We didn't end up winning the championship, but we came runners up and lost in 5 games, and I was really proud of the season I had that year, maybe even as much as the years we won the championship. But since then, it's been something that I've always done. I got to my off season, and it occurred to me, if I could pick up the phone and have this great, speak to someone who had this really positive impact on me, and all it took was a phone call, why wouldn't I be making tens or hundreds of phone calls to all other kinds of people that I admired from afar, respected from afar, or even have better conversations with the people that I respected that I already knew. So I started doing both things. I messaged AFL coaches, rugby coaches, netball coaches, leaders in business, captains of footy clubs, all kinds of people. And most never got back to me, but quite a few did. And the conversations that I had with those really incredible people were worth more than a bookshelf worth of books that would have taken me forever to read, and it wouldn't have been nearly as specific for me as what these conversations were. And it's something that I encourage everyone I speak to do, and especially with the access social media gives us to people. How long would it take you to write a direct message to someone who you admire from afar and say, "G'day, my name's Chris, I admire you because of whatever the reason is, and if there was ever an opportunity, I'd love to be able to pick your brain on a Zoom call for 5 minutes." And that might take you a minute. And if nothing ever happens, you're in exactly the same position as what you would have been as if you never had written this message. But if they do get back to you, it can really change the trajectory of the way you attack things, because it's coming from someone who I think you'll probably relate to. And again, I've had some incredible results, and I know that other people close to me have had incredible results from just reaching out and being a little bit vulnerable, and letting a little bit more of themselves and just having a proper conversation with someone they respect. And same thing on the flip side. It was funny, after when I retired, it's an extraordinarily long answer to your question. I apologise.
No, that's all right. That's all right.
I'll never forget the week I retired. The week I retired, we couldn't make the finals this last year. I missed most of the year with injury. I decided to retire, and the most common question you get is, who's been the biggest influence on your career? And there's always a few, and I'd be telling everyone who cared to listen about 4 or 5 people in particular. And I'd tell them why, and I'd go into detail, kind of like what I am now, but about these incredible coaches and mentors that I had. And it occurred to me that the only people I hadn't told these stories to were those people themselves. And I just made a pact to the week leading up to my last game to call all of them and try to catch up with them for tea or a coffee or a beer or whatever it was. And I sat down with each of them. I said, "Look, I wanted to come and catch up with you, and I wanted to tell you the stories I've been telling everyone else about you." And that was one of the most powerful things I've ever done. And then it gets conversational, and you get off into these conversations that you realise you've had some really special people in your life, and you probably don't see enough of them.
Yeah.
Maybe share enough of you, or I know we all do it. We tell people how great our mates are or how great someone is, then you realise you've never told them. And that tends to come back the other way a little bit as well. So that was kind of how my career wound up. It's funny what you remember. I don't remember the last game that week, but I remember sitting in the bar on a Wednesday afternoon getting pissed with all of my teammates because we couldn't play finals, and just telling stories until late in the night, and deciding on that Wednesday that over the next 3 days I was going to go and catch up with these 5 people. And so that was what I remember from my last week of basketball. I know we lost the last game, but it didn't matter.
Yeah, I kind of guess going on from that, kind of looking away from basketball for a little bit. I know we spoke on the phone, and you've kind of mentioned it already about the important role that your mates play, and in your kind of mental health and your well-being, and like you obviously show that you show a lot of gratitude towards them and stuff like that. Did you maybe want to explain how now, kind of post basketball, and in your life now, how important your mates are, and what you guys have, catch up? And
we have, like most people, we have a Facebook group. We have all kinds of banter, and we catch up, either all of us or some of us, as often as you like. And I know when people get to know me, they're sometimes really surprised by they're like, why the hell are you friends with him or her? Because my friends are all very different. All come from different walks of life, but we all just kind of click. But I think we're all really authentic, and we're really, none of us care to, we'll have a conversation about anything. And it's funny that we joke with, some of us have got kids, we've got daughters, some of us have got partners, all that sort of thing. Like, can we, the girls, the partners, the kids, people from outside the group come and sit around and join, and like, can we be a part of this group? Like, nah, it's not really. Because as much as they see us watching sport and having a bet on the races and having a beer at the sport, whatever it is, we also talk about some pretty important shit when it's just us as well. And
which was going to be my next question. Like, are you guys comfortable just opening up and talking about your emotions? Or
because, I mean, if you're having a problem with someone, generally the person you're having the problem with is not often the best person to talk about it straight away. You kind of need someone to filter your thoughts and filter your emotions, and more the point, you probably need time to filter your own thoughts and emotions. I mean, I know over the years and even when I coach, but when I've been in a relationship, when I've coached, that people are often surprised that I'll be in the middle, either a bad loss as a game or an argument in a relationship, whatever it might be, and then I'm like, well, I'm just going to leave, I'll be back later. The team will go, we just lost by 30 and that's it, I'll see you tomorrow. Or it might be, well, you can't just fucking walk out of an argument. And arguing really doesn't get you anywhere, because it's just emotional stuff you'll end up regretting probably saying later on. And almost without fail, if I went away for an hour or went away for however long it took to actually figure out what I felt and came back and was a little bit more level-headed, so that here's what I wanted to say, it's normally a small fraction of what I would have spurted out if I was emotional. And I don't think many of us are at our best when we're emotional. We say things we don't mean, we do things we shouldn't do. And probably as much as anything, that's where these group of mates are really important, because you can be emotional and they'll let you vent for 5 or 6 minutes. They go, you're done? Now tell me what's really wrong. Or, have you thought this? And we've all got that sort of relationship where we can call each other out, we can tell each other anything, and it's almost a bit of a filter before we go back to either a team, a relationship, or whatever it might be. And you've got a different perspective going in. It's never, I've found with me, it's rarely as bad as what you think it is.
Yeah. So I think this might be a good time to bring you in, Carl. So obviously Chris has these relationships, but kind of doing my research for tonight and just in general, there's a lot of, I read that 1 in 3 men are not satisfied with the quality of relationships, typically because they do not feel like emotionally connected. And I guess the stat was also about 1/4 of men feel that they don't have these kind of relationships at all, that they can kind of open up. What's your kind of opinion on that, and how we can kind of, I guess, get guys more connected to be able to express their feelings?
Yeah, it's a great question, Michael. Good to finally meet you too, and Chris. That was incredible. I could keep listening for another half hour.
Oh, he's great.
Yeah. I suppose, I mean, what you're touching on there, Michael, is a lot of blokes sadly don't have that tribe that Chris speaks of. So they don't have the benefits of being able to open up. And even if they do have those mates, a lot of the time, unfortunately, as blokes, they're very surface level. And I hear that all the time with clients. have you got anybody else in your life you could speak to about these things? Well, yeah, I got my mates, but we don't really talk about that stuff. So, I mean, short answer, I think the best way that we can get more blokes doing this is having events like this, talking about it and role modeling it. I mean, I think it'd be incredible if every bloke in Australia heard what Chris just had to say. To have, quite a a big 7-foot basketballer, to be able to talk about how he sits around and is vulnerable with his mates. I think that's so powerful, because it gives guys permission to actually give that a shot with their mates. And 9 times out of 10, if they are vulnerable with their mates, with the people they trust, then it'll be met really well and received really well.
And what do you think it is that men kind of, and I guess it'll swing back to masculinity, I guess, at some point, but what do you think it is, men that are like, you know what, I can't show my feelings, I can't show weakness, I can't, I don't want to tell my mates, that sort of stuff?
I think, it's spoken about a lot, but especially in Australia, it really does go back to that stereotypical Aussie bloke. It goes back to being the provider, being stoic, strength. It's that almost Hollywood hero character, the stiff upper lip, almost, she'll be right mentality, which, it's interesting. I'd love to hear Chris's insights about how the mental health perspective might have changed in his career in sport. But I think even in Australia over the last 10, 20 years, we are getting better at that, but it still very much exists in certain cohorts, in certain parts of the country, and it certainly exists within all of us, I think, to some degree. And it's not to knock those qualities about stoicism, self-reliance, or anything like that, but that stereotypical Aussie bloke, the only emotion that's usually acceptable is anger, getting in a punch on or a biff, or crying, but if it's at the grand final or the championship game. Yeah. So I think that Aussie mentality of the typical male, but even that, if you look back even further, really does stem from that. You are the provider, that sort of caveman brain that we all possess. You're the provider, you are the rock.
Yeah. So I guess going back to you, Chris, have you seen a shift in, I know you obviously played, you coached, and now you commentate. Have you seen a shift?
Huge. I don't think, the time, the resources, the effort that goes into it, and the understanding as much as anything is incredible. But to this day, it's still easy to write the word on a wall, but it's much, much harder to act it out in real life. Or, we can be empathetic on a wall, but are we genuinely empathetic? Like, do we actually care? Or are we just trying to care because we know we should? And there's still, I think, there's a pretty big gap, a big step to take for us to actually genuinely care about people around us, and not just say that we do or act like we do. I was going to ask Carl, because I like reading and listening to these sort of things. I heard a couple of I was listening to a talk or an expert talk about vulnerability just during the week, and I wrote a page full of notes, it was just coincidental that I was coming on, but these were the ones that really got me. Was, vulnerability is actually a paradox, because if I was looking at someone being vulnerable, it looks like courage, but for the person being vulnerable, it feels like weakness. So it's perceived in two very different ways. And the other part was, when we meet someone, and the thing that occurred to me to go back, Michael, to my group, is that this group of mates I have aren't people that I've been mates with all my life. Some of these guys I've only known for 2 or 3 years, but we connected. I never used to be someone who had any interest in making new friends later in life, but if you're pretty open, you tend to sort of gravitate, or you find your way to people you'll have a proper conversation with. But this is the note that I wrote down as I pulled up. It said, when I meet someone, the first thing I'm looking for is, are you real? Are you authentic? But it's the last thing I want to show you about me. And I think that's a really interesting mindset. And that really rang true, that whether we're dating or whether we even just walk into a room with our mates, or up to another couple of blokes to watch the footy, we're trying to figure out in our minds, is this person a genuine person? But we're full of shit as well, because we're trying to protect that about ourselves. So it's got to work both ways a little bit. I'm just fascinated in your thoughts, Carl.
Yeah, I think I'm familiar with the talk or the literature you're referring to. It's an interesting one, isn't it? Because we're always sussing out who's safe, when can we drop that facade and lower our guard. And I have chats with a lot of clients about this, especially, you referred to, Chris, you weren't one of those people that wanted to find new friends or mates later in life. A lot of the chats I'm having with clients are trying to encourage them to do that because they don't have any mates sometimes, sadly. And one thing they'll often say is, yeah, but how do I do that? How can I open up? And a lot of the things we end up talking about is that, you know what, you might actually be vulnerable, lower your guard a little bit, and you might get hurt. They might take advantage of that rather. But I suppose as hard as that is, then you very quickly realize that's not your tribe, that's not your people. But I think that's the hardest part of that, is that you're risking being hurt. It does tap into that caveman brain that we all have within us, that by showing vulnerability, as you said, for that person, it is a weakness. It's almost revealing a chink in the armor.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. And I've never really thought of it like that. So it's you make a really good great point there, Chris. I guess kind of, again, there's no real connection here, but kind of moving forward, I would love to get your thoughts on COVID, and I guess because we are starting to slowly integrate out of it, which is unreal. I can speak from experience. I'm sick and tired of being at home. I'm one of those people that kind of was hit pretty hard with work and stuff like that. I missed out and being at home. I just miss that connection with other people. But how do you think the society will go to integrate back into, I guess, normality now once it's over? I think that it's not going to be as smooth as everyone thinks it's going to be. Like, it's such a shift. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I completely agree. I think it's going to be really concerning. In a few other countries that are a few weeks ahead of us, there's articles coming out about the next wave actually being, of course, the economic impact, but the mental health impact. And I've started to see this with clients already. For some clients, the COVID restrictions was awesome. They loved it. For others, it was really heartbreaking. Like you said, on a personal level, you, Michael, it really impacted you negatively. But for those clients who it had a positive impact, they're dreading going back to normality. Yeah. And they're trying to figure out now, like, what was it about their previous normality that they didn't like, that wasn't in line with their values or what they wanted their life to be about, and how can they alter that? The other thing is, I think what we will see is that some people who think they've been going okay thus far will slowly get back to some sense of normality, whatever that looks like over coming months. And they'll realize that, wow, I'm actually not doing as well as I thought. Because even if some people have been lucky and maybe it hasn't been too stressful, the COVID lockdowns, it's still actually been quite traumatic. I mean, I can remember, like, I'm sure all of us sitting for 2-3 nights in a row, just glued to the TV, watching Scotty when he walks out of the cabinet meeting going, well, what's next? What next? What does this mean for my work, my social life, my family? And that is quite traumatic. So I think it's important to acknowledge that this has been a traumatic event for all of us and adjust our expectations accordingly about, exactly as you said, Michael. We're not just going to slide back into normality like we were living 3-4 months ago. It's going to take some time, and what that normality looks like is a big question as well.
You touched on values there. How would you suggest, especially for your clients, how people could find what their values are to kind of help them align, whether it's a new normality for them, if that makes sense, hopefully?
Yeah. So I think for one thing I've been encouraging, I saw a great quote the other day. I can't remember what it exactly was or who wrote it, but it was something along the lines of, before returning to normality, actually consider what have you realized by pressing pause on your life and taking a step back about your normality, and what parts of your old normality do you want to take going forward? Because for a lot of us, I'm sure everybody can relate on some level, there's some stuff that we were doing that probably wasn't in line with who we want to be or what we want our life to be about. And underpinning that are those values. So I actually realized, well, what is that fluff that I can hopefully remove or reduce or decrease in my life? Could be as simple as spending 2 hours on the train. If you can get around that once, twice a week. Could be I've got to spend more time with my partner or exercise or doing things like that. How do I keep that thread from COVID life and take it with me into the new sense of normality?
Yeah, definitely. And what are your thoughts around this second wave pandemic that a lot of people are predicting? How can we kind of look out for ourselves, but look out for the people around us? Because obviously it's going to change quite a bit. How can we kind of, look out for each other? Having that connection, like Chris said, he's got his mates where they can, but for a lot of people, they might not have that. How can we kind of look out for those people? And
well, it's a good question, Michael. I think what that touches on is too often, especially around mental health advocacy, we talk about reaching out, make sure you speak up, all those things, which are fantastic. But especially in times like now, all of us right now could think of 2, 3, 4 people in our lives who could probably do with us checking in on. Just a text, just a call, an email, just something to touch base. And even if they don't open up to us, at least they know that somebody's taken the time and effort to touch base with them and actually check in with them. I think that would probably be the best thing because it's all impacted us in so many different ways.
How much weight behind, like, just a simple text message do you feel there is? Like, for example, if a mate that you haven't spoken to for a while just sent you a text message out of the blue and, hey mate, how you going? Hope things are well. Do you feel that holds a lot of weight in the men's mental health?
Hugely. I mean, without being dramatic, I've spoken to many blokes over the years that have talked to me about previous suicide attempts or when they've been sitting in the car or sitting wherever thinking that way. And you ask them, what was the thing that stopped you? And honestly, a lot of them will tell you, well, I saw a text from a mate or I had a missed call or, I had that chat with my mate the night before. And it might not have been about the stuff, but it's like, well, fuck, like somebody actually does care about me. And I couldn't do that to them.
Yeah, I think that's important. And Chris, you touched on that before, it's not hard to send a quick text message to tell, like, I come home and I tell my wife about, all my mates and the great things that they did. But like, as Chris kind of mentioned, like, usually I don't tell them. It's it's kind of one of those things that you just assume that they know, which is interesting. But I guess probably now's a good a time than any just to open up the floor. If anyone's kind of got a question for Chris or Carl on anything we've spoken about, or
can I ask Chris a question?
Yeah, go for it.
I'm fascinated, just briefly, Chris, to hear about how that view of, I suppose, mental health, maybe not the resources, but in terms of the players, changed in your time being a professional athlete.
I think, like anything, it starts with awareness first. I've always been, every group I'm a part of and every group I've ever coached, one of the first people I've ever brought into the staff as a psychologist, because there are some things that I think one thing about leaders and coaches is that the more they realize they're not an expert in everything, they can bring the right suitably qualified people to be around them, the better the group is going to be. And so I've always been around psychologists, but it occurred to me, with young athletes oftentimes, is that the term psychologist can be scary. Oftentimes we feel there's a problem with us if we need to speak to a psychologist. I mean, I still do, whether I'm going good or going bad, and bits and pieces of information I can get. But if we called them mentors, it seems a lot less scary. And I've found that oftentimes it's the stigma attached to the science of psychology that is off-putting. And now, look, the one thing I've found is, whether it's mental health or whether it's just people who are struggling in general, is that I've learnt that oftentimes the thought of doing something is scarier than the act of doing it. almost without fail, I know that the times I've been scared or hesitant to do something, the minute you pull the Band-Aid and you do it, almost every time it's, why didn't I do that earlier? It wasn't as bad as what I thought it was going to be. And I think that's to me, from my uneducated opinion, that is social, that is mental health. It's helping people understand that it's okay to rip the Band-Aid and let them go, and give it a try, because you don't have to go back, but you might as well try. No one's going to get hurt if you try to talk to someone professionally. And I think there's been a greater awareness of that in sport. And I think it's not looked down upon, for lack of a better term, like it used to be. It was always seen that you were weak, or like you mentioned before, or there was something wrong with you if you needed to do that. I think it's considered pretty normal these days.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we do have a question, James. Mr. Green.
Thanks. Chris, Carl, thanks very much. Really got a lot from both of your reflections. I suppose, Chris, my question's more to you. You sort of gave a great outline of a sort of quite transformative journey that you've been on. Just interested to know over that time, how, sort of what you observed about how other people responded to you as you changed, whether you noticed that you were more available to the people around you, or perhaps if people started interacting with you in ways that they perhaps might not have before?
Yeah, I'd sort of probably, the more I grew up and I went through that, I probably found that the thing for me that I probably noticed most of were people seemed to be comfortable telling me things. And I always took that as a really great compliment, that it seemed to infer some level of trust. It didn't matter that I knew nothing about it, whatever they were speaking about, but I think sometimes it was just the fact that I listened and I actually gave a shit. Didn't listen because I felt like I had to, or didn't listen waiting to get my point across. You know, I mean, you've all heard the whole listen with intent to reply, as opposed to listen with intent to understand. And the more you go through things, you realize how little you do understand. And I've always been fascinated in people, fascinated. I suppose one of the things that was actually one of the psychologists that was a part of our group said to me, he's like, just keep in mind, every single person when they turn up to work today is going through some shit in their lives, just like you. So don't assume everyone's going great. You know, they're always going through something. If you get to a stage where they'll share it with you, great. But if you don't, just keep in mind, everyone's got some shit going on in their lives. And I think it helps you treat people just a little bit better. I mean, there are so many cliches around it, but I suppose the other thing that I learned, and funnily enough, I'm starting to put together a presentation on it, is that we're all smart. Human beings are smart. We're taught to know the right answers. If I ask any athlete that I've ever played for what they need to do to get better, they'll tell me. They know the answers. What do you need to do to improve? They know the answers, but what very few people have any idea of what those answers actually look like when you walk out of the room and try to apply them to real life. So I suppose that's how I ended up captaining, and how I have always tried to coach, is that I try to help apply what people know or think they know and give them real life opportunities to demonstrate what they are great at, or in fact what they struggle at, and help them improve. And yeah, how do I apply? I mean, it's a tricky question, because I never really cared too much about what people think about me. I did, but I got more and more comfortable in being me. I don't try to be anyone. I'm not to impress anyone. I gave up on that years and years ago. All it does is confuse me. I couldn't remember the bullshit I was telling people to try to have them like me or accept me. And that was when I guess I started finding the people that I really did connect with, because they connected to me, not the persona that I was putting forward in the hope that they'd like me. And that could have been mates, it could have been coaches. You know, we all lie to bosses when we try to get a job. we always put forward this persona that we think people want to see. I think the biggest thing for me was the minute I stopped doing that and started just being me, I'm like, hey, like me or don't, that's on you, but I found out who did pretty quick.
Perfect. I think, Amelia, you have a question? Got your hand up?
Yes. I hope the dogs don't bark during my question. I guess this is for either Carl or Chris, but so Carl, you talked about the idea of the Aussie bloke and how men tend to be stoic and stiff upper lip and so forth. And I guess at the moment with COVID, a lot of men are losing their jobs and are losing that sense of being able to provide for their family and so forth. And on the same side, Chris, from an athlete point of view, a lot of athletes that then become injured or retire, they lose that sense of identity. Just wondering from a friend point of view or a colleague or a relationship point of view, any tips on how to support someone going through that?
Go ahead, Carl.
That transition.
Yeah, that's a real tough one, Amelia. And I think Chris touched on that a little bit too. In his career, he was so mindful of not wanting to be a basketballer. He was a guy who played basketball, but unfortunately, a lot of men in particular, they consume themselves in their career. Their identity is enmeshed in their career, and to a large degree, their identity is their career. And so when they recently, as you said, if they lose that, then it brings up a lot of confronting things for them, because it challenges that sense of being the provider, being the breadwinner, and all of those things. And then what's left? I mean, that's really challenging to sit with. In terms of being a friend and a partner, how you can support them through that, very difficult. I don't think there's any really, short answer or golden nugget I can throw at you. I think the best thing probably is just to express that you are concerned for them, that you're there to support them. Flick them maybe some resources. This, as Chris said earlier, the first step is always awareness. And we've had a lot of guys, especially in the last week or two, new clients come in with this exact thing. And some of them haven't even realized it. Because I think that's the other thing about blokes. A lot of us don't have the awareness to identify what is actually going on. There's just something doesn't feel right. So, I mean, as I said, I wish there was something better I could say in terms of the golden bullet, but I think just support, communication, expressing your concern, and unconditional love.
I suppose for me, I always consider myself fortunate to have been around great people, and I'll never forget. Yeah, sometimes people say things to you that stick with you. And back when I played, back in 1995, I was walking through the casino, the old Crown Casino before it became the new one, with the guy who'd been charged to build it and get it up and running because they sponsored the club. And every single person that he walked past, from the dealer to the waitress to the manager, whoever it was, he said hi to every single person. He knew every single one of his staff members' names in a casino, and he asked them one question, whatever it was, as we walked through. And I was amazed. I'm bad with names. And we sat down and I said to him, how the hell do you do that? And the way he remembered names wasn't the thing. The fact that he wanted to was important, but he said, I've been really, really fortunate to get to the position I am. I've had to go past a lot of people on the way to get to where I am. And he said, but I'm only going to be for a little while, and it's going to be the people that I pass on the way up who either catch me or let me fall on the way down. And I think that was really relevant to how I approach my sporting life, that I always loved spending time with sponsors. I love doing clinics for kids, all those jobs that a lot of athletes really see as below them, or the ones that they don't really want to do. I mean, if any of you have ever been in a room and there's a sporting team who comes to the event, they stand in their own group and they talk amongst themselves, and they don't get out and mingle. And the one or two guys that get out and mingle get shit hung on them for not being a part of the team. But, my answer is, yeah, I struggled when I retired, but I always still had these people that I'd known through sport that were going to make it. I wasn't going to fall as hard because I spent time getting to know them while I still played, and those relationships were pretty authentic. So I didn't, the people who I climbed over didn't step aside and let me fall. They were there to catch me. So I always tell people, my answer to nearly every single question is people. It's how you treat other people around you, because at some stage with the right people will come back and help you, and you just don't know when.
Definitely, I think that's a really good point you make there, Chris, about kind of helping or caring about the people around you, not just the people really close. Does anyone else have any questions? Yeah, Zach?
Thanks. I'll try and get the camera working. It's been a little while since we've seen you guys. Thanks for having me on tonight. I really appreciate it. First of all, Chris, just want to say sorry you're a Bulldog supporter, but I'm a Lions supporter, so we're both mutual friends of ACCA, I guess. My questions for both of you, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the role as a leader, as a coach. And I think a lot of people struggle to find the balance between being too stoic and showing leadership qualities and decisiveness and whatnot, and then balancing that with the right level of vulnerability so that you're not oversharing and creating a burden on the team or the people you support around you. And I just thought, that struggle or that tension between those two extremes can often prevent people from, leading with authenticity. And I'd love to get your perspectives, both of you guys, on how to strike that balance well, and how we can help our leaders that we're, reporting to, and the people that we respect around us, to strike that balance well and create a better culture.
I'll be brief and I'll hand over to Carl, but for me, it's all of anyone who tries to be a better leader and tries to be a better boss or tries to prove that they can lead, I think don't have a chance from the minute they start. I think the more it's genuinely about almost being a highly skilled servant of the people that you're leading, understanding what they need, but then having the tools to be able to provide them. Again, the quote, no one cares what you know until they know how much you care. Get to know your people, get to really understand what makes them tick, because even in a group of 10 basketball players, every single player is without doubt going to need something different on the court and off the court. And if you've just got one regimented way of attacking it, there's very, very little chance you've got it succeeding. So again, the answer becomes people for me. And, I don't think you can try to be authentic. Either you are or you aren't. I don't think you can try to be empathetic. Carl, this is where you can probably correct me. You either are or you aren't. And you can try to be better at it. But the balance, you need to be skilled at what you're employed to do, but you need to be doing it for the right unselfish reasons. Again, someone said to me not so long ago, there are some people who want to coach and there are other people who want to be coaches. Don't employ people who want to be coaches because they're doing it for the wrong reasons.
Yeah, I agree, Chris. I mean, you can be, it's an interesting question. You can be authentic without having to be vulnerable all the time as well. And I acknowledge, Zach, that especially if you're under leaders or managers who are particularly, a bit more old school and not authentic, they've got their game face, manager face on, that's really hard. And I see this when I do some corporate speaking in corporate events. You can just, when some of these guys ask questions, or women, you can tell that it's going to be hard to shake that and hard to step away from that in terms of their views on mental health, but also in terms of their views on vulnerability and being authentic. But I think, as Chris said, authenticity, you either are or you aren't. It's not something you turn on and off. But in saying that, by being authentic, whether it's in your personal life or work life or leadership, coaching, whatever it is, that by being vulnerable, we're not saying scream from the rooftops and tell everybody all of your shit. It's about knowing who in your life to talk to about that. Like Chris said, he's got his tribe. It's knowing when to be vulnerable, about what, with whom. But you can still be authentic with people without, sharing all of your skeletons, I guess, with everybody in your life.
Carl, can I jump in? And this is something that I've done a lot of, and I've asked thousands of people this, and if you allow me to do this with the group, I don't think I've ever actually asked a qualified psychologist, so I'm intrigued. But when I do some of these presentations, I'd like, if everyone, I mean, I'm sure you've all had mentors, coaches, leaders in your life. If to go back to your question there, Zach, if all of you were to think of that best leader, mentor you've ever had, just that normally there's one person that stands out amongst everyone else, and hopefully now you might have someone in mind. And if I was to ask you to describe that person in one word, what would that word be? Would actually anyone like to maybe just give me 2 or 3 words that came to mind by chance? Maybe you're on mute.
I'd probably say proud.
Yeah.
They're a proud person.
Yeah. Zach, maybe do you have a word by chance?
Yeah, I'd say honest and actually generous.
Yeah. I've asked thousands of people this from groups of CEOs to younger students, and not one time has anybody ever said a word that had anything to do with skill. It always had to do with how that person made you feel. And so to answer your question, Zach, it's, as a great leader, how do you make people feel when you walk in the room? Do they want to be there? Do they want to do their best for you? And I think that comes back to how you treat them. You can be the best at what you can, know everything in the world, but if you can't get your message across because they don't know or like you, I don't think you're a great leader. You just know a lot of stuff. So that's something that I've always tried to take with me. How do I make people in the room feel when I'm in it? And I think that goes a long way to becoming a better leader.
Has anyone else question for Carl or Chris? Yep, Sean.
I'll go if that's all right.
Yep, yeah, go for it, Sean.
Yeah, this one's for Chris. What I found is vulnerability breeds vulnerability, especially with like guys in my group, and that once I open up, others do. With what you're doing, especially guys in the culture or the age group that you would have been in, have you had an experience where like what you're doing is really amazing? So have you had an experience where you've seen that happen?
Yeah, from anywhere from the old school people sitting in the middle of a circle and having almost not honest feedback where it's meant to be in the right way, but it's still got to be tough, back a couple of decades ago, all the way through until, I knew I was doing something right as a head coach when and this was one of my best moments as a coach, when we lost a game, and it was one of those really disappointing ones. And I said a few things after the game, not attacking anyone, but in and around disappointment and in and around a few other things that were going on behind the scenes. And 5 of the players turned up to my house at midnight with a slab of beer. I said, we figured you might need to talk. I thought, fuck, I've done something right. And when I look back, that's the guy I've always tried to be as well. I think, you say pick up the phone, you say text. I think text is option 1. If you're a little bit uncomfortable, I tell my students, pick up the phone and give someone your undivided attention, because when you're texting or on social, you're generally texting or on social with 4 or 5 different people. So you're not actually giving fully of yourself. But just knock on someone's doorstep with a 6-pack of beer. You want to see how powerful that is if you know they're struggling. And you sit down, and if there's one thing about blokes, if you want an icebreaker, have a beer with them. And I hope I'm not saying that out of context and promoting drinking or any sort of, but sometimes that just lets their guard down enough. But I've had all kinds of conversations. I've been with a coach of mine who lost his daughter. I've been with players and coaches who've broken up in relationships, who've lost dogs. As many things as I can remember, but they're the really good conversations. And I don't say that in the wrong way. They're the ones where they're real and they're authentic. But certainly I've had those exact same conversations with the same people, and you like to think that they know you can relate. I think they open up the more they know you're listening and the more that you can relate. Whether you've got the answer or not is largely irrelevant.
Oh, cheers.
Yeah, definitely. I agree with that. And I guess that's kind of what Beyond the Barbell was created for as well, where guys can kind of come in and be vulnerable. And I guess that kind of unconsciously gives other people to be vulnerable around them. So I think that's a really good point, Sean. So thank you for sharing. Is anyone else? No? Well, that's probably a good point to kind of wrap it up on this wet and cold Thursday night. So I guess I want to thank Carl and Chris both for your time tonight. You guys have been unbelievable. Again, I've been following Carl on the socials for a long time and listened to his podcast and his videos and everything he kind of goes on, talks about really resonates with me. And I've met Chris a couple times. I've got photos with him and he makes me look like a dwarf, even though I'm 6 foot. And obviously a huge basketball fan, followed his career. And like most 90s kids, absolutely NBL fan, and was super excited to see you on the start of The Last Dance, episode 3, was it?
You know you've done it right when you get a 1-second cameo in a documentary.
Yeah, well, there you go. I was about to say, you got more than Luke Longley. So, I'm so happy that these two guys could come along and speak with us tonight. So hopefully next time we get together, it'll actually be in person. As I said, I am over the restrictions, but I know they're there for a reason. So again, guys, thank you so much for joining in. Finally, just thank our supporters. So we've got True Protein, Valiant Barbers, in Heidelberg, Moondog Brewery, so Moondog World in Preston, which is unreal. If you haven't been there, it's got an inside pool. You're not allowed to use the pool, but it's pretty cool. Grillo Coffee and Northside Fitness. So these guys have been awesome supporters for all our events. So thank you very much to those guys. Have a very safe and happy weekend. And yeah, that's it, guys. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, everyone.